There's people who are predators roaming around like lions out in the public who just kill for the sake of killing. And we don't like to think those people are in our midst, but they certainly are.
Let's talk about the University of Idaho killer, Bryan Kohberger, who sat stone cold-faced in court during the gut-wrenching testimony of the victim's family members. He refused to answer any of the questions or provide any details that the victim's family so desperately wanted. He refused to speak when given the opportunity. And now, since the gag order has lifted, we've been slowly getting additional details from the crime, including how this brutal stabbing of 4 individuals unfolded. Today, I'm excited to introduce you to a very special guest, board-certified forensic psychologist Michael Brannon, who is going to get into the psychology behind the Idaho killer and explain how his mind works and how he thinks in a way that is completely different from normal people like you and me. Stay tuned on Judge Liz. Hi, I'm Judge Liz and welcome to my channel. For those of you who are new here, you may recognize me as I'm the judge who presided over one of the most notorious and widely followed cases of the death penalty in American history. That's the case of the Parkland shooter. I recently retired from the bench and went into private practice, where I'm a partner at my family's law firm, Conrad & Scherer in Fort Lauderdale. On this channel, I get into all of the cases that you're most interested in, the ones that are most popular, in the news, the salacious cases, and I try to give you a point of view that you won't get on any other channel. So welcome, thanks for joining me, and stay tuned. I have exciting news today. We have a very special guest joining us, Dr. Michael Brannon. He's a renowned forensic psychologist and death penalty expert. He's worked on over 100 death penalty cases, including the case of the Parkland shooter. And he's here with us today to shed some light on this monster, Bryan Kohberger. Dr. Brannon, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Judge. I really appreciate the invitation. I hope I can live up to that wonderful introduction.
Well, it's so nice to have you here. Again, Dr. Brannon worked on the Parkland shooter case. He had the occasion to interview the Parkland shooter. He's had the occasion to interview many suspects that are facing the death penalty to find out their diagnosis, to figure out, how they work, how their mind works, why they do the things that they do. And although no one truly knows why evil people do the things that they do, Dr. Brannon gets very close to getting answers. So we're going to ask him some of your questions today. Specifically, let's start with Dr. Brannon. I know you haven't ever met Bryan Kohberger. You don't know him, but from what you have read and the knowledge and the information that you have, do you have any idea what his likely diagnosis would be?
So, of course, mental health professionals cannot diagnose anybody who they haven't interviewed directly. We decades ago, we said that's just not something we should do because people are kind of using that against other people for political reasons. And so we kind of stopped doing that. But there are some features we can always look at to say that there are some things that are consistent with certain diagnoses. Like, for instance, in this particular case, in the Kohberger case, we right away want to start thinking about personality disorders, things like antisocial personality disorders and psychopathy or psychopathic personality disorder. But along with that comes things like narcissism or narcissistic personality disorder. So right away, when you hear the fact patterns that are involved in this case, you right away start to think about personality styles that are cut off or distant from other people, that don't allow them to feel remorse or empathy towards other people.
Okay, and are those common? Let me ask you this: what was the Parkland shooter diagnosed with?
So
if you remember.
Well, I do remember, but if there was a wonderful judge on that case who had entertained a lot of different mental health people who had a lot of different diagnoses. So my diagnosis of him was that he had antisocial personality disorder and he had psychopathic traits. There was also some narcissism with him as well. So that was the diagnosis that I had. Most of the people on the state side shared that, but there was certainly a variety of other diagnoses that other people had felt were different than those.
Yeah, but I'm not concerned with those other diagnoses. Let's talk about the legitimate professionals in the field. like yourself. So you diagnosed the Parkland shooter with a psychopathy, likely narcissistic personality disorder, and I think you said antisocial personality disorder.
Yes, there were some others, but they weren't the prime movers for his behavior at the time, in my opinion, of the Parkland shootings. He had been diagnosed with attention deficit disorder when he was younger, and there certainly were elements of that. So we could certainly make a case for that. And there were some learning disabilities too. But the prime movers, or the things that allowed him to do what he did at the time, was what I mentioned at the beginning, with the personality features, in my opinion.
Now, what kind of parallels do you see with Bryan Kohberger, knowing what you know? In other words, what themes do you think reflect those personalities and disorders?
Well, we know a lot of things that happen in terms of murders have a variety of different reasons, and the same fact patterns can happen for different reasons. For instance, in this case, one of the things we know is that the weapon of choice here was a knife, and it was repeated stabbings. So when you see that, you right away start to think about rage and anger. But it's also a much more personal kind of killing. So when you see a knife as opposed to a gun or something like that, or poisoning somebody or choking somebody, it's more personal in that it takes longer to kill that person. So we start to assume from that a person has less empathy or less ability to put themselves in somebody else's shoes and understand what they're feeling and the pain that they're causing another person and their families, of course. That right away would suggest personality disorders like antisocial personality disorder and psychopathy.
So in other words, you're going to kill 4 people, innocent people that you presumably never met before, and you take a knife and stab somebody 50 times, as opposed to putting them in a car with the car running, shutting the garage, and putting a tube from the car, which would make a person fall asleep. The choice to actually bring a knife and stab somebody 50 times, which is over and above what's needed to kill somebody, you would say that goes to the personality disorders that this person likely had?
Yes, Judge. I mean, it's a good start. I mean, it's an overkill is the technical term that we use, and that it's far more stabbings, of course, than it would take to actually kill somebody. And to do that requires a certain level of heartlessness, especially if you don't know the victim. Sometimes it's based upon just some grudge they've had with somebody. They knew the person took their boyfriend or girlfriend or husband or wife or did something terrible to a family member. So it's a grudge killing filled with anger. But if it's someone you don't know, if it's a spree killing a number of different people by the same method, and you don't know those people or don't have a grudge with those people, it suggests more an ability to kind of detach yourself from any feelings of empathy or sympathy or remorse for anything that you're doing.
Now, what do you make of the fact that we now know it was released yesterday? The judge lifted a gag order so that the police are allowed to slowly release the police reports giving further details. And one detail that stood out was the fact that he stabbed one person 50 times, another person 36 times. One of the girls' faces was unrecognizable due to blunt force trauma. What does that say to you as far as what type of person we're dealing with, or what was going through his mind at the time of this brutal killing?
So we think rage right away with that, not just regular anger, but rage. And it may have nothing, or likely has nothing to do with the victims. So rage over his life position, rage over his inability to connect with other people, rage over not being able to get the jobs or be treated as fairly as he thinks he should, or being treated as special as he should. So all of those things go into these type of overkills where rage is a centerpiece of it. If it's not the person they're rageful for, it's something going on within their own life that allows them to do that or engage in those kind of behaviors.
So I can't help but think of a parallel. Of course, you and I both know the Parkland shooting details very well, but for those viewers that don't know, in the Parkland shooting case, there were many victims who, I'm trying to think of a way to say that's just not so bad, but there's really no way to say it. There were victims who were not killed during the first round of gunfire. In other words, they were shot, but they were not dead. And the shooter made a second pass and even a third pass in some instances, and then shot him again. And in some cases up to, I don't know, I think over 25 times. And I can't help but think of a parallel between that and this case where, you probably had him in the first 5 stabbings. Why go to 50? Do you think there's some similarities here?
So, Judge, exactly. I mean, that's what made it different, but the same. I mean, it was a different weapon, of course. I mean, here we had an assault rifle in the Parkland case, but you're absolutely right. It makes them much more similar in that, in this case, the killer, whose name I still won't use, but the killer in this Parkland case, that he went back through again. And you have to imagine what these scenes are like. And the most chilling thing I've ever seen in my forensic career was exactly that video from the Parkland case. And because of what you just said, Judge, he went back through with people pleading and screaming and begging and wailing in pain. He saw that instead of what any other person might do who did something terrible, realized the awful impact of what they did. He decided to further do damage and kill those people. So that was an extra measure of anger, rage, aggression, and cut off from any ability to be able to empathize with the pain that someone bleeding, laying on the ground, a juvenile begging for their lives. This is very similar here, as we know there was likely some struggle that went on in this Kohberger case, and that he continued to carry out his activities despite the pain and injury he was causing to another person.
Yeah, it's really terrible. Now, a lot of people watched the sentencing, which was just heart-wrenching. I mean, any sentencing, I don't think anybody can be prepared to hear what loved ones have to say about this type of crime. It's just something that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. But I did watch parts of it so that I could provide some insight on it. And of course, I sat through the Parkland sentencing. I found, again, a lot of parallels, but there were the victims in this case were the family members were sort of begging him or demanding that he provide details and a motive. And then many viewers and many people in the public are shocked that he declined to do so. I was not surprised at all. Were you?
I was not. People want answers to how someone can do something terrible. In some ways, it makes us all feel safer, or makes the victims' families feel some closure about why this person did this. It was mental illness. It was substances. He was angry at somebody else and took it out on the victim. So that it completes the circle. It gives us closure, if you will. But it's not always so simple in the cases, as I know you know, Judge, that we deal with, including the murder cases. Sometimes there is no rationale. Sometimes we don't like to accept this, but there's people who are predators who are roaming around like lions out in the public, who just kill for the sake of killing, who kill for the sake of sport, who kill for no real justification other than they can do it and they want to do it and they think it's something that's exciting, and that's how they carry it out. And we don't like to think those people are in our midst, but they certainly are.
Like a deranged monster. I mean, I remember when the Parkland shooter, when I accepted his plea. Now, I guess I'm learning that in Idaho, every defendant at a sentencing has to be given an opportunity, an allocution, or an opportunity to speak. In Florida, we don't have that. This was a open plea, so the viewers know. That means he was pleading open to the court. There was nothing negotiated. And then I didn't make him any promises other than he knew he was going to have a trial where a jury would decide whether he would be sentenced to life or death. During that plea, at the very end, I was just remembering as I was preparing for this video today that he sort of stood there and, I had to ask him questions about his mental state and how old is he and how far did he get in school to make sure that he knew what he was doing. But at the end, I remember he just sort of mumbled something about and I just want to tell the families that I'm sorry and I did it because marijuana. I smoked too much marijuana, and it was like this pathetic excuse.
I hate drugs, and I believe this country would do better if everyone would stop smoking marijuana and doing all these drugs and causing racism and violence out in the streets.
And then nobody asked him to give. It just was a spontaneous statement, and it was pathetic. It was like the Parkland shooter to me looked like this dumb, just a nobody, a person, a loser, a person who can't even speak up, who can't even stand up. He's afraid of his own shadow. He's standing there and he can't even come up with a coherent sentence. Somebody that you'd pass in the public and you'd never remember him. The reason I bring this up is because I want these victims in the Idaho case to know that if he did speak, this guy's a nobody. He had to kill 4 people in a malicious way to make a name for himself. otherwise he's unremarkable. He's somebody that you would not remember. He's probably not very smart. He's not very intelligent. He has probably a personality that nobody would want to be around. And that was my impression of the Parkland shooter. He said these things, and it was not only stupid, but it made no sense, and it certainly didn't make anyone empathize with him. And that was the best that he could come up with. It was kind of laughable.
Yes, Judge. And I think in some ways there are some similarities between Kohberger and the shooter here. And I shouldn't mention Kohberger's name either, but he's all over the news, so I guess I can mention that. But
I just haven't thought of a way to describe him yet. But yes, Dr. Brannon, that's so nice. I think in the future we'll have to come up with a name, the Idaho University murder or something to that.
It's just troubling that they get notoriety, even on a very well-watched podcast like your own, that they get some notoriety by their name being said when they've done something horrible. But there's more relation to the killer here. Let's go with that. The killer here. To Ted Bundy than there is to actually the killer. And again, there's another name we've used that everybody knows, but it's more similar to that person. And the reason why is they are both smart. They both are articulate. They are both charming. They are both people who are very cut off from their emotions and their ability to connect. But they convinced a lot of people that they were normal, that they were okay. They integrated themselves into society. In this case, you have the killer who was a teaching assistant, who's in a doctoral program, who's accepted by other people and looked up to in some ways by other people and seen as on a career trajectory where he's going to accomplish a lot of things. So when you look at that, these are people who kind of fit into society like Ted Bundy, who are indistinguishable, and they're even liked and supported and trusted. And that's how good their skills are at convincing other people. They don't have this more evil, dark side behind all of this.
But and speaking of Ted Bundy, so I've watched all of the documentaries on Ted Bundy, and he was very full of himself. Maybe this goes with the narcissistic personality disorder.
Yes.
But I believe if victims asked Ted Bundy to speak, he would have gotten up and given a whole, he would have put on a show. How do you think that differs from this Idaho murderer?
So there certainly was a lot of narcissism. If you read anything about Bundy, and again, we're using these names, but if you think anything about him, one thing that really stood out was his narcissism. He wanted this stage. He wanted his name out there like this. This is what gave him fame. And he portrayed himself as innocent throughout all of this, that he didn't do this. Here you have the killer here who at least acknowledged and pled out and acknowledged that he had done these killings. Bundy was saying he was innocent all the way through. Bundy just wanted to be able to get up and perform. He wanted to be a lawyer. If you remember about Bundy had a bachelor's degree in psychology and was in law school. So he really aspired to be out there in front of other people and talk about himself. But the world centered around him. And in many ways for this killer here, there's a certain degree of narcissism that only what he thinks and his worldview matters, is the appearance that it gives through what we know through the media. So if indeed that's the case, narcissism is a key feature in antisocial and psychopathic personality disorders.
The fact that he didn't speak when the judge gave him an opportunity to, do you think that he is less likely to have that narcissistic personality disorder? Or do you think he just didn't speak because the victims wanted him to speak?
Yeah, it could be a number of different things. I mean, his reinforcement may be different. For him, just the fact that he got over on this, that he did it, and that, he accomplished this, and now he caused this pain in other people, and he was the center of the show. That may have been enough. I don't know him, I didn't interview him, but that may be enough for him to feel like he's satisfied, like he's gained something from this, like his name is being mentioned. Whereas on the other hand, Bundy had a bit more of a showman in him. He wanted to be out there in front and talk and even represent himself at times in some of these cases. So narcissism shows itself in different ways. So what exactly do you do? And especially, Judge, what do you do right after it? What do you do to bring attention to yourself? What is your affect? How do you present yourself after? Is there any evidence of how, in this case, this killer acted afterwards? That may give you some insight into whether he has narcissism as one of his personality traits.
Well, have you seen recently, I think that this actual photo was leaked before the gag order was lifted, but now that the gag order has been lifted, it's all over the internet, where allegedly a couple hours, well, I guess we don't have to say allegedly anymore, a couple hours after the killings, he takes a selfie of himself where he's sort of grinning. Have you seen that photo?
I have. And that is really, it appears to be just the height of narcissism. It looks like someone who's proud of what they've done, proud of what they've accomplished. It's a smile and a thumbs up on top of it. So a
Yeah.
thumbs up right after these killings. So that's a person who's kind of saying, I accomplished what I wanted to accomplish. Look how wonderful I am. Look how great this is. Here I am. I've done it. So there really is a lot of not only narcissism, but an ability to compartmentalize any feeling bad about anything that you did, if you even have that capability or skill. But it's really kind of a self-focus that you've accomplished your mission. You did what you set out to do. He may not need to advertise it any more than that. And that may be how he differs from, let's say, the killer in Parkland and Ted Bundy.
Sure. And one question that so many people have had is, well, how did he sit stone-faced in court? He didn't, his mother was there, and apparently she was crying and she was very emotional. And there was this gut-wrenching testimony from the victim's family members, and he's stone cold faced. He's not making any emotion. There's no sadness. He's just like, he's watching a movie and it's boring, like watching a boring documentary. That's the face that he's got. This does not surprise me because the Parkland shooter did the exact same thing. I expected nothing more and nothing less, which is why at sentencing, I didn't give him a chance to speak because, quite frankly, I didn't care what he had to say. It didn't matter what he had to say. If I asked him, he was just going to say something stupid that nobody wants to hear. So I tried to make our sentencing about the victims, about their families, about their loved ones and their lost ones, and how we would never forget those that were lost. And I tried to just completely shut out the defendant because of the Parkland shooter, because, quite frankly, I didn't want to give him his minute in the spotlight. He had too many minutes, and he had really nothing to offer. So to me, I was not shocked by the fact that the Idaho killer sat there, cold-faced, no expression, no remorse, no expression on his face. What do you think?
Well, we like to think, and this is one of the things we talked about at the very beginning, Judge, we like to think that other people have the ability to feel things the way we feel them. If something bad happens, or a family member talks about how much they're going to miss this person and never see them again, or how horrible it was, or how traumatized they are, we like to think that other people who are responsible are going to feel the way we would. They're going to feel bad. They're going to hurt. They're going to cry. They're going to be remorseful. They're going to apologize. They're going to say, I don't know how I did such a terrible thing. It's awful. Forgive me. I'm so sorry, and genuinely mean it from the heart. But unfortunately, some people don't go there in terms of their emotions. They don't make that connection. They don't feel that. And that's the cornerstone of some of the, fancy personality disorders we've been talking about, is that they don't feel or experience that. So whether you talk about the killer, the shooter in the Parkland case, or if you talk about, let's call him the killer in the Florida State case, that we were talking
Sure.
about earlier, or this killer here that we currently are discussing, if they don't feel that, they're not going to show it. They're not going to express it. Other people's pain doesn't affect or impact them at all. If it did, they probably would have stopped after this killer, probably would have stopped after the first killing or after the first couple
Sure.
of stabs. But he didn't. And the reason why he didn't is he probably doesn't go, and I don't know this for certain, but it's likely based upon his reaction, his thumbs up pose, right after the killings, it's likely that his emotions don't go there. He's one of those outliers that we don't like to think is walking around, but they are. They're in the restaurants we eat in. They're in the movie theaters we go to. They're at the sporting events that we go to. And they have the capability of doing things that we, in our worst day in 1,000 years, could never possibly even conceive of ourselves doing.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. And you sort of hope that, I hope that most people don't ever have to see what we've seen, because it's something that people, when they first see something like this or hear about something like this, people want to know why. And when I first became a prosecutor and a judge, I would say, but why? I don't understand why. Why would this guy molest his sweet 6-year-old daughter? Why? And somebody that I worked for, was very older and wiser, said, don't try to figure out why. Liz, you can't think like this kind of person. If you're gonna drive yourself nuts trying to figure out, but why? There's no answer. They're just not wired the way you are. And so somebody like you who feels empathy and who hopefully, I try to be a good human being, you're not going to understand why. So stop trying to understand.
Just like there's different types of animals in the animal kingdom, there's different kinds of human beings. Whereas you can pet most Labrador retrievers, you shouldn't pet a lion. And if you can't tell the difference or don't want to think there's differences, then you're going to get a surprise. Unfortunately, there's more Labradors than there are lions, but there are a lot of lions out there that are willing to take a bite just by you approaching too close. And most people, we don't have this luxury, Judge, because we've been exposed to so much. You as a prosecutor and you as a judge, we got exposed to the terrible things that other people can do to other people, innocent people who they don't even know a lot of times, like in this case. But most people have to live in a bubble to protect themselves from that. If you had to think about that every day and thought about every situation you were in public could become a crime scene because it's a soft target, it'd be difficult for you to get through from one day to the next. So most people have to entertain or live in that kind of world, in that bubble, and not look at the things that we look at every day.
Now, Dr. Brannon, I don't want to keep you much longer, but I have one other topic that I really would like to get your insight on. So a lot of people are wondering, why wouldn't somebody like this, or why wouldn't a person in general choose the death penalty? If you know you're going to be put out of your misery, you're going to basically go to sleep and never wake up, why wouldn't you choose that rather than being in a high security, max custody type situation in a prison? And for those of you who don't know, somebody like the Idaho killer, somebody like the Parkland shooter, because there's a lot of people that want to off them, they're kept in max custody and in isolation. They're not put in general public. So they're basically in not solitary confinement per se, like in a small cell, locked, with not being able to go outside, but their contact with the outside world is extremely limited because people want to kill them. And the last thing the Department of Corrections wants is somebody to be murdered in prison, either in Idaho, Florida, or whatever state. So a lot of people knowing that say, Judge, why wouldn't he just agree to the death penalty? And I've heard of maybe one case in Florida where somebody pled to the death penalty and wanted it. I think the person later changed their mind and said, no, I don't want this. But in my experience with the Parkland shooter, I remember when Detective Curcio was a very well-known detective, and Dr. Brannon, you know him well, and he's taking the statement of the Parkland shooter. And the Parkland shooter says, oh, well, poor me, I wanted to kill myself. And Curcio says, bullshit. You don't want to kill yourself. You had 15 chances to off yourself before we picked you up. You could have killed yourself here. You could have killed yourself there. You could have done this. You could have done that. And you didn't do it. You don't want to kill yourself. You have this grandiose sense of self-worth. You wanted to kill other people. You wanted to cause other people pain, but you don't want to die. And then I remember during the trial, we heard testimony where he said, I'm not afraid to. Oh, actually, I am afraid to die, especially if it's a painful death. So how do you sort of make any sense of that? Is that the narcissistic personality? To sort of what do you think plays into somebody's decision that they want to kill other people, but they don't want to be killed?
So you have this unfortunate quality that you're a normal person, and I like to think of myself as that too. So when we look at other people and see those circumstances, we say to ourselves, I'd rather die than sit in a horrible prison like that forever and be put up with the abuse and the terrible stuff that happens in there. I'd rather die. Why would I want to put up with that for how many years I have left? But because we think about things in normal ways, it's different from the way other people who do these acts conceive of themselves and perceive it. For them, there's notoriety forever. They get to live with the fame of what they did. They get to live with the sense of accomplishment of having done this. Even in some prisons, and a lot of prisons, there's a certain hierarchy, and those who have committed murders, especially multiple murders, can really be at the top of the hierarchy. They can be the ones who are the most looked up to. So in these circumstances, when you see people who have committed an atrocious act like this, rather than feel bad or remorseful or horrible or how could I have done that, I wish I would die, they think the opposite. Look at that. This will live on forever on TV shows, on podcasts, and social media, on Snapchat, forever. This will be talked about, and my name and me will be known forever as one of the people who did this and got away with it. So his thrill is there, and to reenact that thrill, to play it back in his head and think about the thrill and the reinforcement, maybe even sexual satisfaction, which is a whole nother podcast he may have gotten as a result of this. That's something for him worth living in those conditions for. It's different from how we would perceive that world.
That's interesting. Dr. Brannon, you have been a wealth of information. I know that the viewers are going to really appreciate hearing the psychology behind this Idaho killer, the differences and the sort of parallels between him and the Parkland shooter. I think it's very fascinating. We really thank you for your time. You are such an expert in this field. I know you told me earlier that you're working on 6 death penalty cases right now.
I am. I don't know how they talked me into that, but I am. But Judge, I appreciate you having me on. It's always a pleasure to be with you in whatever form we're in.
All right. Well, thank you again for joining us, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you so much. You too.
And that's all for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you enjoyed meeting Dr. Brannon and hearing what he had to say. Let me know in the comments. What did you think? Did you learn something? Is there something you agree with that you disagree with? Is there something that you would like me to go over in the future that I missed today? Whether it's good, bad, or other, I'd like to hear it. I do try to read all of the comments, and I do try to respond to the majority of them if I can. Your comments are extremely helpful in knowing what you like to hear and knowing what to do for my next video. So thank you for joining me here today. Please subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time on Judge Liz.